The sun is doing all kinds of stuff today, so I apologize in advance. This lighting is gonna be like up and down and up and down. The novel that I have been working on for nearly a year now officially has a complete first draft. And yes, there's still revisions ahead, and yes, there's still more to do, but this is such a huge accomplishment. It was one of the most successful first drafts I feel like I've ever had. Actually, take that back. It was the most successful first draft that I've ever written. So there's no title really that I can give for you right now. I do have a working title. There is one that I've been calling it, that I have at the top of my manuscript. It's the name of the document, the Word doc that I use. But I don't want to say it because I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to change it when I'm revising. You know, as much as I love this title and I feel like it really works, I want to leave myself open to kind of, you know, tweak it, change it, rethink it as I revise, just in case. So this story officially started in, I think it was April of last year. So it's been pretty much exactly a year since I first started writing the first notes about this world and this concept. I don't remember the exact date, but my Microsoft Word document that I wrote the story in, because yes, I use Microsoft Word for better and for worse, I created it in April. So I don't remember the exact date, but it was in April. And then my very first writing session I have written down in my notebook. It was on July 31st. So I took from, you know, April, May, June through July to really develop and plan and make sure I didn't jump into the story. I've talked about this before. I really think that outlining and planning is where I need to put a lot of my creative efforts when I start a new project. That's just what works for me. I am a plotter. I need that time to really develop. And even on July 31st, when I did that first session, it was a little bit premature probably. There was still some development I was doing. And then those first few sessions through the beginning and, you know, kind of mid-August, I only had a couple of sessions, and it was really because I was still developing. Even as I was writing those first scenes, I was still, you know, finding the story, working on my outline, fixing, you know, gaps that I was still seeing in my outline that needed to be addressed before I really, really launched myself into the book. And then the last writing session that I did when I finished the very first draft was March 21st. So it was definitely less than a year because I really started in August through, you know, March. So that's a really good pace for me. I know a lot of people will have their own kind of ideas. I'm sure you have in your head an idea of if that's a really fast first draft, if that's a really slow first draft, just depending on what you have done in your past, or, you know, what other author tubers are talking about their speed is. I'm not competing with anybody else when it comes to speed. I used to look at, you know, the speed other people were writing and really judge myself based off of that. But there's a lot of things to consider. First of all, there's a lot of people who have completely different schedules from what I have. And then even people who are juggling the same number of things or more things than I am, they're just different. They're a different writer. They're a different creative brain. So they're going to write differently. There's also different genres that we write, you know, different styles of stories. It can't be compared, basically. Don't compare yourself to anyone else. And I'm saying this as much to myself as I am to you, because it's something that I've struggled with a lot. I am no longer in a race against anyone else. And for me, just based off of my past first drafts and my past revisions and writing in general, this was a really, really good and speedy first draft. I know probably a lot of you clicked on this video hoping to learn a little bit more about the story, and I'm still gonna keep a lot of it secret because I wanna slowly reveal more and more to you, especially as I'm doing revisions, because the story is bound to change and to shift and to just evolve as it should in revisions. But I will tell you a bit about the concept, because the concept was actually the first thing that came to me, and it is probably the closest inspired by my own experiences, despite still being fantasy and still being very different from what I've experienced. In a nutshell, the plot is centered around Elliana, who is a regular person just like you and me, no magic or anything, and she has the opportunity to study abroad in this other world. And these two worlds have coexisted but been very separated for hundreds of years. There is a backstory about, you know, when they first discovered each other and all of that. That's also something I've developed a lot, but I want to develop more when I'm revising so I can really build out and flesh out this world. But in the time that Elliana lives, these two worlds know about each other, and they have this program that's basically like a study abroad program that we experience ourselves, except instead of different universities in different countries, we have, you know, academies in different worlds. So students from Earth are allowed to study in the magical world, and the magical world students have the option of studying abroad. Obviously, this is very much based on my own experience because I did study abroad, and that's what I thought was really interesting about this idea when it came to me, because it's a little bit different from kind of your typical magic school vibe. And this is really something I'm trying to be very conscious about as I'm writing this book, not to tread the footsteps of the magic school trends and the magic school stereotypes, because I'm not writing a magic school book. I'm not writing another Harry Potter. I'm not writing, you know, something that's been done so many times and been done well. I don't want to write it because it's been done well. What I'm really focusing on is the study abroad experience. So my main character has no powers. Again, this is something I'm going to save for future videos and future discussions, but the magic in my book is not really like hardcore magic. It's not like waving wands and incantations. It's really abilities and skills that are just abilities and skills that we as humans and regular people don't have. This is something I'm going to work on in revisions, really trying to define how these fantasy elements play in my book and how they differentiate from other magic systems. With Elliana, my main character, I have tried so many new things as well, not just picking a character who is the ordinary one amongst people who are not ordinary, which is sort of the inverse of what a lot of stories are based off of, and all of my stories in the past have been really based off of, you know, this protagonist is very special in some way. This is almost flipping the table, because she is the only one who, I mean, I guess that makes her special, but she's the only one who doesn't have these abilities. So she's kind of the ordinary one among non-ordinary people. And it's the first time that I personally have written a story that's based around a protagonist like this. But she's also very unique because her entire personality and the way that I want her to come across on the page is very different from my stereotypical protagonist. In the past, almost all of my stories as well as novels have been centered around a young female, which is something that I just prefer to write. I will try to write, you know, a protagonist male in the future. I'm already starting to kind of think of some ideas, but right now it's really just what I love to write and what I love to focus on. So she fits the bill in that way, but before, my characters were very often really like outspoken and bold, and they had a really like strong attitude. It's difficult to describe because so many times you fall into traps of using these stereotypical adjectives to describe someone, but really they were snarky. They, you know, said things that were really sharp and clever, at least that I hoped and thought were sharp and clever, and they just had this really bold personality. Elliana is not like that. She's actually quite reserved in a lot of ways. Not that she doesn't have a personality, she absolutely does, but I am just conveying it in a very different way. And the way that she interacts with the world and the way that she interacts with people is just so different from how I've written my main characters in the past. This development of her character to be something so different from my past protagonists was a little bit both intentional and natural. I think that's kind of, it's key when you're developing your characters. There has to be some amount of organic growth of this character in your head, but at the same time, I really did want to make a conscious decision to make a different type of protagonist and to try something new and to challenge myself, really. And she was a challenge. That same mix of conscious effort and organic growth of a character also had to go into creating my other cast of characters. And in particular, I have two side characters who are the most instrumental and the most, like, they have the most interactions with Elliana. We have a boy named Dorian and another girl named Tamaris. And both of these characters I also tried to let grow in their own ways, but also to guide them in ways that I thought would work well with Elliana. Not that either one of them is going to be a foil for Elliana, not that either one of their sole purposes is to bring out something in Elliana, because that is kind of a danger that a lot of writers can fall into. They have to exist in their own way, they have to have their own purpose as well, and they have to have their own arc, which can't really happen if their entire existence is to do something, you know, to show something about your protagonist. But at the same time, I really did want them to have personality traits that would interact well and that would, you know, make for fun conversations, make for fun interactions, and just, you know, because they all have to contribute to the plot, I wanted them to be able to contribute in their own unique ways. I won't talk too much about their specific personality traits and their development in this video because otherwise it's going to be extremely long, but just to say that they all three have their own kind of unique things that they bring to the table, and I really like the way that they interact. And again, in revisions, that's one of the things that I want to make sure is really solid, is this band of characters, despite the fact that they have their disagreements and they have very, very big differences between them when it comes to who they are as people. They still need to be a very convincing and lovable group of characters. This would be a really natural place in the video to talk about my antagonist, but I'm going to save that one for definitely a future video because the antagonist of this story was its own special challenge, and I have talked a little bit on my Instagram about the fact that antagonists have been kind of a challenge for me in the past, and I really wanted to go far beyond and above what I've done with my past antagonists and really create an antagonist that is good. Like, I wanted an antagonist that I was really curious and interested about, and not one that, you know, fell into too many stereotypes, which is something I feel like my past novels have kind of suffered from. My antagonists have not been particularly convincing. I wanted to fix that with this book. I really wanted to create a good villain, and I hope that I have done that, but we'll find out in revisions. As far as the actual writing process of this draft, it is different from my past projects in that I have written a lot more regularly, and I felt like my sessions have been very condensed, focused, you know, in a tight time frame, because often I wrote on my lunch breaks at work, so I had, you know, 45 minutes or an hour maximum to just pump out as many words or to make as much progress. It doesn't have to be words, but just to get as much done as possible and then, you know, switch gears back into work. And that sort of headspace is totally different from how I normally have written in the past, where I have written, you know, after work or on the weekends and stuff like that. But I found it really worked for me, despite the fact that there were some frustrating moments when I had to wrap up a scene or just stop in the middle of a scene because end of lunch break, I have a meeting, so I have to, you know, stop now. And that's really a weird feeling when you are so into a scene and you're so, like, you're making such great progress, and then just to have to cut yourself off because reality has said that your time has run out. It's really weird, and it's not something I've experienced before because I have normally written when I have open-ended time ahead of me, or at least somewhat open-ended. But one thing this has started to teach me, which I think is really valuable, especially if one day in the future I manage to make this more of a part-time or full-time occupation, it's something that I'm gonna need to be able to do, and that's to be able to kind of flip on the writer switch and flip off the writer switch, and to really focus and to get myself into writing brain, even when it's not the most convenient moment or when there are distractions around, but to teach myself, this is your time to write. You don't have another chance because you can't write after work, you'll be too tired, or you have this thing with friends tonight. You have to write right now, and you have to separate work and colleagues and other things during the day. And then as soon as it's over, you have to be able to turn off that writer brain because now it's time to focus on something else. And that's exactly what you do at work. I mean, you have to manage your different tasks and things like that, but it's not something you typically do with hobbies. Hobbies are something you feel like doing, so you do it, and then, you know, when you get tired of it, you turn off the Xbox, or, you know, you close the book because you finished a chapter or whatever. But when you're writing, it is really a different type of skill to be able to flip it on and off like that, and to not just write when you feel like it, and to not just write for open-ended amount of times for as long as you feel like it, but really to teach yourself to obey a time schedule rather than sort of your whim or your inspiration. I'm not saying I've fully mastered that, of course, but it's just something that I'm starting to develop the skill for, and I'm getting much better at it. I feel like this video is getting very long, so I'm only going to briefly touch on one of the things that I will definitely need to do some work on in revisions, and it's really the only place in the first draft that I feel like I hit an actual block, and that is the climax and the end. I hate endings, not because they're not amazing and one of the most brilliant parts of the entire book, but because they are so challenging. So actually, in a way, I kind of love endings, but they're just really, really difficult, and I'm always very nervous for them. And in this case, that's the one place when I had a little bit of a breakdown, and I just thought, what have I done? What is this book? What have I dedicated the past 6, 8, 9 months of my life to developing and to working towards, and then I'm just gonna destroy it now. Of course, that's not the reality of what happened, I hope. Again, we'll find out in revisions, but I do feel like I pulled it together pretty well, but I kind of panicked, and I definitely had a lot of stress. And I think a lot of the reason I was stressing about it, and a lot of the reason it felt so difficult to finish, was just because I was putting so much pressure on myself that all of this work that I've put into the story and all of this stuff I've developed and all of these amazing scenes I've written, they all are hinged on this ending and this climactic moment, and then all of the unwinding, which is both equally the most difficult to me. And it's just so important, and you have to do it so well. And really the only way I was able to break through this and to get through the sort of obstacles I was putting up for myself, but also that were being put up for me by the story, because there were some things that I had some trouble kind of pulling together. But the only way I made it past that was just to push ahead and to force myself to write it out, and just reminding myself, it's gonna need work and revisions anyway. You'll fix it, you'll fix it, you'll fix it. You have to get something on the page in order to make it good. Like, it doesn't have to be good the first time. It could be good the first time, but it doesn't have to be. And you'll never know if what you've written is good until you've written it and you have something there to work with. So I pushed ahead, I forced myself to write, and there was even one moment in particular I can think about. I wrote the way something happened, this thing I knew had to happen. I had point A and I had point B, and the way it happened, I wrote it out and I thought, that's really bad. I don't like the way that worked. That's not what I imagined, but I have to have something, so here. And then literally the next day I went back and I had intended just to keep writing from after point B and not to rewrite point A to point B. And then I just had a new idea and I thought, this is so much better. Like, why didn't I have it happen like this? And I erased what I'd written. Well, I copy pasted it in another document just in case. And I took it out and I rewrote it. And all of a sudden it worked so much better. The second way that I wrote it only came into my head and only occurred to me after I had written that one way, realized that's not good, I don't like that. Given it some time, given it a bit of space, given it 24 hours, and then all of a sudden I had a better idea. And I don't ever think I would have had that idea if I hadn't messed up the first time and sort of seen from the hindsight of 24 hours another way of doing it, a better way of doing it. With that said, I'm going to wrap up this video here. There's so much more I could talk about, not only with the climax and the ending of my book, but also, you know, like I said, my character development, the world building, all those other aspects. I will be talking a lot more about those in future videos and as I get into revisions and as I start working on these things even more. So I hope you've enjoyed this video. I hope it's been interesting to learn a little bit more about my Elliana story as it is right now. Make sure you're subscribed to my channel and you have notifications turned on if you want to see those revisions videos, if you want to learn more about this story as it develops and as it gets closer and closer to a final draft, maybe one day, someday in the future. You can also follow me on Twitter and Instagram for more regular updates. Instagram in particular, I am on every single day. I'm also planning a Q&A pretty soon and I will be asking for the questions from Instagram, so make sure you're following me there if you want to participate. As always, thank you so much for watching and I will talk to you very soon in another writing video.